A reading from Genesis 37. Jacob settled in the land where his father had lived as an alien, the land of Canaan. This is the story of the family of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was shepherding the flock with his brothers. He was a helper to the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he had made him a long robe with sleeves. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him, and could not speak peaceably to him. Once Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream that I dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. Suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright. Then your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." His brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us? Are you indeed to have dominion over us?" So they hated him even more because of his dreams and his words. He had another dream and told it to his brothers, saying, "Look, I have had another dream. The sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, "What kind of dream is this that you have had? Shall we indeed come, I and your mother and your brothers, and bow to the ground before you?" So his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." He answered, "Here I am." So he said to him, "Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring word back to me." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron. He came to Shechem, and a man found him wandering in the fields. The man asked him, "What are you seeking?" "I am seeking my brothers," he said. "Tell me, please, where are they pasturing the flock?" The man said, "They have gone away, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. They saw him from a distance, and before he came near to them, they conspired to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we shall say that a wild animal has devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams." But when Reuben heard it, he delivered him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but lay no hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand and restore him to his father." So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the long robe with sleeves that he wore, and they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty, there was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat, and looking up they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, with their camels carrying gum, balm, and resin, on their way to carry it down to Egypt. When Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers agreed. When some Midianite traders passed by, they drew Joseph up, lifting him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. Then they took Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in the blood. They had the long robe with sleeves taken to their father, and they said, "This we have found. See now whether it is your son's robe or not." Does anybody else listen to this story about Joseph and think, oh no, they ruined that beautiful coat? By all accounts, it was a work of art, even if it was a bit flamboyant. Joseph's story provides an important function in the larger account of the birth of ancient Israel. Later, we will encounter Moses. The saga of how God gave Moses a mission to lead the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt and into the Promised Land is one of the most formative in all Judaism and Christianity. First, though, the storyteller needs to establish a legitimate Israelite claim on the land to which Moses will lead them. Enter Abraham and Sarah, and their son Isaac, and his son Jacob, who you may recall was renamed Israel after his all-night wrestling match. Then the storyteller must explain how the descendants of Jacob ended up in Egypt. This is Joseph's role. Even his brother's evil plot to get rid of him by selling him into slavery results in the fulfillment of God's plan. However, there is a great deal more to this story about Joseph than simply explaining how he and his siblings ended up as slaves in Egypt. We learn that Jacob settled in the land where his father had lived as an alien, the land of Canaan. This is the land that eventually will belong to Judah. In sending Joseph north to check on his brothers, Jacob is sending him to the land that will in time belong to the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh, the sons of Joseph. Go now to Shechem, he tells his son. Shechem is the center of power of the northern hill country of Palestine, just as Jerusalem is the center of power of Canaan's southern region. Generations later, when David unifies the tribes of Israel into one nation, the northern tribes will resist bowing to Jerusalem. Their allegiance has been to Shechem. Subtly, our storyteller is suggesting that our ancestors established themselves first in the south. It is from there that Jacob sends his sons and his flocks north. So Jerusalem takes precedence over Shechem. The brothers are no longer in Shechem. They have driven their flocks up farther north to Dothan. This is convenient for the plot because it places them right in the path of the trade route between the Tigris-Euphrates River Valley and Egypt. Therefore, it comes as no surprise that a caravan passes by, ready customers for a slave named Joseph. And Joseph's brothers destroy a really nice coat of many colors in the cover-up. Is it any wonder the brothers take away Joseph's coat and ruin it by dipping it in goat blood? That coat is the symbol of their father Jacob's favoritism. Notice the way they address Jacob when they send him the bloody coat. See now whether it is your son's robe or not. Not our brother's robe, your son's robe. While Joseph is bringing back bad reports of his brothers to Jacob and checking up on them in the northern hill country, that coat serves as a sign of authority. Uniforms and badges come in many colors and stripes. No matter how beautifully the sheriff is dressed, the outfit still conveys a message. President Kennedy addressed Amherst College about a month before he was assassinated. When power leads man toward arrogance, poetry reminds him of his limitations. When power narrows the areas of man's concerns, poetry reminds him of the richness and diversity of his existence. When power corrupts, poetry cleanses, for art establishes the basic human truths which must serve as the touchstone of our judgment. We could substitute fashion, music, architecture, drama, sculpture, or any other art form for poetry. JFK would probably approve. I like this quote. It makes me think that the work I do is powerful work and honorable and critically important. If poetry and music and culinary delights can remind us of our limitations, remind us of the richness and diversity of our existence, establish basic human truths, then no one is a more essential worker than a poet, an artist, a musician, or an architect. I remember when Laszlo Toth, a Hungarian man, jumped the railing at the Vatican and struck Michelangelo's Pietà numerous times with a hammer. The year was 1972. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. It was and still is my favorite sculpture, no longer so much for what it portrays, but for its sheer beauty. I got to see the restored Pietà 5 years ago, now enclosed in a plexiglass cage. I felt equally horrified 3 years ago when fundamentalist members of the Islamic State began systematically destroying ancient sites in Iraq and Syria. They claimed to be destroying idols in the name of Allah. Why then do I feel no such horror when activists tear down statues depicting Confederate heroes? Muslim extremists are not the only ones to obsess about idols. There is a lot of talk in the Hebrew Scriptures about idolatry. The second commandment is, "You shall not make for yourself an idol." There is a Midrash story that tells of Abraham when he was a boy, and his father Terah, who made idols for a living, left young Abraham to watch the shop while he ran an errand. Abraham smashed all but the largest idol and put a stick in its hand, to say that the idols were all arguing over who should get to eat the offerings. 2 Chronicles 15 tells how King Asa of Judah removed his mother Maacah from being queen mother because she had made an abominable image for Asherah. Asa cut down her image, crushed it, and burned it at the Wadi Kidron. Later, we learn that Manasseh, not Joseph's son Manasseh, but the longest ruling king of Judah by the same name, worshipped idols. So God sent the Babylonians to capture him. When he repented, God released him from his captivity, and Manasseh returned and destroyed many idols. Israel has, in turns, banned or merely shunned music by Wagner because of the themes of racial purity in his operas and the fact that he was Hitler's favorite composer. Likewise, Richard Strauss's music has had a rough go of it because Strauss was the president of Hitler's Reich Music Chamber. The venerable city of Rome has taken a different approach. Among its numerous obelisks, for example, 8 are from ancient Egypt. Constantius II, nominally an Arian Christian emperor of the 4th century, brought the largest standing Egyptian obelisk in the world to Rome. Pope Sixtus V erected another Egyptian obelisk. Diocletian moved one to Rome for the nearby Temple of Isis. It disappeared for centuries, but was found and erected in the 17th century by Pope Alexander. Yet another obelisk that stood first in the Temple of Ra and then in the Temple of Isis was brought to Rome in the 14th century and moved in front of the Pantheon by Pope Clement XI. Clearly, the Vatican's history reveals a preference for the preservation of ancient antiquities in favor of strict adherence to the Second Commandment. Likewise, in Paris, La Madeleine is a Catholic church that was intended as a monument to Napoleon's army and has many elements of ancient Roman mythology. Evangelical Christians denounce the Catholic practice of decorating their churches with stained glass, carvings, and paintings. One priest explained it to me that this practice is not idolatry, but education. Particularly for illiterate people who come to worship, artwork portrays the stories of the Bible in ways they can understand. For those of us who are able to read the words for ourselves, artwork can take us beyond the mere words on the page to consider more deeply the meaning they represent. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. For one person, something may be a work of art. For someone else, that same object may be an offensive idol. Pol Pot becomes the Prime Minister of Cambodia and exiles or murders 90% of the royal ballet. To him, the epic sagas they recreate in their dances represent old and backwards ways, those of the Khmer people. To UNESCO and the Khmer people, this body of expression is an intangible cultural heritage. Why then am I comfortable with the monuments to Confederate heroes coming down, but not those to Thomas Jefferson or George Washington? True, these two architects of our nation had slaves. Everything in my being is repulsed by that knowledge. At the same time, we cannot erase these two figures from our history without losing essential understanding of our system of government and how we got where we are. Should we cover our memorials to Dr. Martin Luther King because he cheated on his wife? Should we knock down the statue of Gandhi at the Ferry Plaza because he beat his wife? Should I have chosen a quote other than that by President Kennedy because he used the term man instead of humanity? Or should I have changed all of the masculine pronouns to make the language gender inclusive, even though it would have sucked the rhythmic vitality out of his words? It is not as if we do not do exactly that on a regular basis, altering the text of anthems the choir sings so that our music reaches all of our congregants. When is poetry or drama or music idolatry? And when is it that which serves as a touchstone of our judgment? When it comes to the monuments that are being pulled down from New Orleans to Golden Gate Park, I think a piece of the answer is that those shrines become touchstones of our judgment when we who are privileged feel as much shame about the history they represent as the disenfranchised people in our nation feel outrage at the way they have been and continue to be treated. If people of color enjoyed similar fruits for their labors as their pink-skinned counterparts, I seriously doubt that demonstrations would be happening. If the economic and racial statistics of our jail population matched those of people on the outside, we might not need to march. We still read the stories of Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, and Jacob and Leah and Rachel and Bilhah and Zilpah, even though they were bigamists and slaveholders. Even though the heads of the tribes of Israel turned on their own brother, and even though Joseph had it coming, God was able to take their messy disputes and turn them into salvation for the land of Egypt and for Jacob's family. But that is a few chapters later. Our own next chapter remains to be written. Yet in our disputes and our cries for justice, and yes, even in our missteps and evil plots, God is in motion, even though we may not recognize it.